Tonight, on Late Night Update, we look into the first summit meeting of BRICS and the mysterious disappearance of Vladimir Putin. Just where is he hiding and what is he hiding from? Is that person he's hiding from? Do they wear prosthetic masks? Then we veer off into the Far East, past the electronic Berlin walls with Detective Cagney, as we make our way to Eastern Europe, as Tucker Carlson's sit-down interview with one of the most outspoken leaders, the Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, and a fierce and staunch critic of the EU. Viktor Orban shares his sentiment, his pride, his thoughts, what many truly feel about America, and just who can save America, if not the globe. Then we make our way back to Vancouver, Canada, where we do a bombshell interview. New World Precious Metals, Bryce Wade, a geopolitical skeptic, also admire and observe her as he shares his true sentiment about financial Armageddons that are placed and chained on Americans in this pandemic war. Also, exactly what is really happening in Canada and just how much treason and how much espionage is enough. Bryce Wade will join us. So sit back, brace for impact as this two-part series of Late Night Update with Dean Ryan is about to begin. Good evening. Welcome to Late Night Update. I'm your late night host, Dean Ryan. Tonight we're going to have a significant look at the developments in the now post-Ukrainian war efforts as Vladimir Putin is now seemingly under siege himself by the West as NATO in their last-ditch efforts to create a bigger war in far more regions than many Americans even think that go way past the Ukrainian border. In addition to that, we're going to see how BRICS is now, well, they're now accepting new members, welcoming new members as the dollar and the Federal Reserve it's on life support. We're going to be also hearing from a significant rising star in the world stage is Prime Minister and leader of Hungary, Viktor Orban, is now speaking to the West directly through a very popular journalist. Joining me on this excursion tonight is our Real Deal Media's foreign affairs analyst, Detective Cagney. Detective, welcome. Welcome to Late Night Update. There's a lot to cover here tonight, and a lot has happened since we really kind of endeavored in one of these ordeals here tonight, because the world is evolving and it's accelerating at a pace we probably haven't seen in quite some time.
Hi, Dean. Yeah, absolutely. You brought up BRICS, and it is official now that Egypt has officially joined BRICS, and Turkey and Saudi have officially applied to join BRICS. So this is just news within the last, 24 hours. And also breaking news just in the last couple of hours is St. Petersburg in Russia has seen a drone attack, and Putin is being rushed to the Kremlin to keep him safe.
You know, let's get into this here because Vladimir Putin, one of the leaders spearheading the BRICS alliance, well, there was a lot of anticipation for their huge first summit over there in South Africa. But that didn't really happen, did it? Because as the leaders and everybody was showing up at the red carpet, well, one very important person was missing, and that was Vladimir Putin. So where are we with Putin, Russia, and I should say the absent Putin?
Well, just because he was absent doesn't mean that BRICS summit didn't take place. It did. It still took place, even in his absence. I'm sure they did a remote with him. But they had all the rest of the leaders there. So that still went as planned. And as I stated, several countries have stepped up. And from what I understand, there's 30 or 40 other countries that are in line trying to apply to get in BRICS. So the currency, with Egypt right now, they're ready to do it immediately. And what they want to do is start with the currency aspect of it, which is what they've applied for, and then move into full membership of BRICS. So it's happening.
Yeah, yes, it is happening. And yeah, you can only imagine the assassination teams and attempts on people that are for the nation state is at an all-time high. Let's talk about this for a minute. The fact that we have now Egypt, Saudi Arabia, India, some big players, but particularly Saudi Arabia and then Egypt and that whole region that has been renowned for its oil trade in US dollars is now flipping over and making the change to BRICS. Doesn't this signify the end of the European Union and particularly the end of the United States Federal Reserve?
I think it symbolizes the end of the reserve, not necessarily the EU just yet. I think that, first of all, in Europe, the euro is not the only currency that's used. I mean, there's many countries here that use their own currency. So the US dollar is the one that the pending questions are on. In the past, of course, everybody traded on debt, which is, the US dollar is based on debt. Whereas now they're trying to move to a actual gold-backed system. Not a dumb move. I mean, because right now we trade US dollars and what do we really have to back it up? Nothing. It means nothing.
It means something to me, and that's what's most important. Just so you know.
Yeah, it means that you can order food on your debit card or whatever. But yeah,
I'm going to make the transition, and because I do want to come back to the U.S. dollar and the significance of this change in domestic policies. In this absence of a missing Vladimir Putin, I noticed somebody was stepping up to fill that void, as maybe Vladimir Putin, who I'm sure speaks great English, hasn't really articulated and spoken to the people of the West in the United States. Well, one person did in a recent interview here. Tucker Carlson, who is on a long vacation this summer, has now extended his trip, and he went all the way to Hungary to speak to a fearless leader named Viktor Orban. And this is what he had to say.
In the United States, the view is that Ukraine is winning this war. It doesn't sound like that's true.
No, it's a lie. It's not just a misunderstanding. It's a lie. It's impossible. Everybody who's in politics and understand the logic, the figures, the data, no way.
Why is it impossible?
Because that way, the poor Ukrainians die every day.
Yes,
hundreds and thousands. So my heart is with them. So it's tragedy. It's tragedy for Ukraine. But they will run out earlier from the soldiers, number of soldiers, than the Russians. What finally will count is boots on the ground. And the Russians are far stronger, far more numerous
there's more
than
of
the Ukrainians.
many more.
So this strategy that we are just supporting is a bad engineering of the strategy.
So if the Biden administration has said our goal is to beat Russia, is to effect regime changes, to kill Putin and take him out of power.
They misunderstand probably the Russians. To understand the Russians, it's a difficult thing, especially if you have an ocean between you and Russia. So when we speak about politics, I mean Westerners, what is the focus point of our conversation? The focus point is freedom. How to provide more and more freedom to the people.
Yes.
When you speak on politics in Russia, this is not the number one issue.
Okay, let's talk about this. Cagney, you have Viktor Orban, leader of Hungary, literally speaking like no other leader I've even heard of. Not even Putin has said the obvious, that Ukraine has not even by a long shot won this war. And the whole world is being lied to, because every day you pick up a magazine, a newspaper in the United States, well, you're going to see the propaganda of Putin's losing, Putin's dying, and Russia has no chance. What do you make of this coming from Viktor Orban?
Well, one point that he's saying is absolutely correct, that in Russia, the number one issue that they have is not based on freedom. It's to keep the country together. And as a leader, he is hell-bent that the people of his country are going to be safe and sound. It's much different than the political aspect that we see in most of the rest of the world. The West cannot beat Russia. Russia will protect Putin, and Putin will protect his people. So he's a very, very powerful leader. And, right now the USA's goal is to take Putin out, and it's a huge mistake. There's just no way. They have too large of a military for that to happen. And the lies and propaganda across the world, especially in the USA, regarding the Ukraine-Russian war is BS. I agree with Victor.
The fact that he's saying this to Western media, but also not just any Western media, probably the most popular and most respected kind of news figure that was ousted by the West. So all eyes are on Tucker Carlson right now. How significant is that? Because he's not just talking to, George Stephanopoulos, who's trying to, undercut him every sentence, after every sentence he says.
Well, it's very significant because I think what he's trying to get across by talking to Tucker is that if the West keeps sending troops, or if the West sends troops rather than just financial or ammunition, then this is what is going to escalate into World War III. NATO thinks that they know what they're doing, but what NATO is doing is putting the rest of the world in danger. So everybody sitting in the U.S., when you're cheering on NATO, this war that is going to happen is not going to happen in Europe. It is going to, well, it will. Part of it'll happen in Europe, but it's also going to escalate all the way to the United States. And considering that Hungary has a border with the Ukraine, it's the last thing that I want to see happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to show you some other clips from here as we continue, and I want to get your take on this because, like I said, this is probably one of the most important key interviews on a world stage with a world leader, or an emerging one at that we've seen in quite some time. Let's continue with Tucker Carlson's interview. Here it is.
The number one issue, how to keep together the country, because the country is very big. And there's a privilege of the question how to keep together the country, and not freedom. Freedom is just another issue, second, third, whatever. First, keep the country together. And that's generate a different kind of culture and understanding of politics. That's create a kind of military approach like they have. Always on security, safety, buffer zone, geopolitical approaches. It's not our culture, it's a different approach. It's legitimate to have that because it's their history. But we have to understand that we cannot beat them as we do just now. It's impossible. They will not kill their leader. They will never give it up. They will keep together the country and they will defend it. We finance more, they will invest more. If we send more technical equipment, they will produce more. So don't misunderstand the Russians.
So they're not going to get sick of Putin and throw him out.
Come on, it's a joke.
What would happen if the West succeeded in killing Putin? What would happen to Russia and its nuclear stockpiles?
Okay, so that's okay. May I recall one of my experience?
Yes.
So I was prime minister exactly at the time when the change happened in Russia, Putin after Yeltsin.
Yes.
Yeltsin was very weak and getting weaker and weaker. And I do remember the fear of that time here in Hungary and in Europe as well, whether there will be a new leadership or not. So the real fear here was that there will be an anarchy in Russia.
Yes.
Putin is out and no new guy who is coming in strong enough to keep together the country, the nuclear arsenal and the army control and so on. So everybody was happy when realized that after Yeltsin, Putin come in and started to control the military and the Russian power as a leader. So everybody was happy. I do remember that. So now Putin is in power for long, long years. We forgot about how dangerous when there is no strong leadership or interregnum in Russia. The interregnum is the worst case possible. So,
but that is our goal. That is the goal of the U.S. State Department.
Yeah, but it's a mistake. If this is the goal, it's a mistake.
It sounds very dangerous.
It's more than dangerous, Okay, if to sit in Washington, safe United States, is a different feeling than to sit here in Budapest. Ukraine is next door country, So what's going on there could have an immediate impact in 24 hours here.
Well, there he said it. A war with Russia is going to affect the entire region of Eastern Europe. And just like you said, it could come back here home to roost. And I'll tell you, Cagney, the entire buildup for the Ukrainian war with the weaponry, with the billions of dollars, which is pure unadulterated money laundering, no question about it, that's going to come back here home to roost. And he's virtually saying, someone who knows the Russians, and I agree, the Americans really don't understand Russian culture, heritage, and pride. They're not going to go and give up on Vladimir Putin here, and they're going to succeed in the end and overcome with perseverance, are they not?
Well, absolutely. If there is an attack, then the whole Baltic region here is going to consider the West as acting in terrorism. And, even with regard with the pipeline, already we consider it an act of terrorism. But the funny thing is that, just to get into the pipeline for a second, that's the North Stream. There is a South Stream pipeline. So I know the U.S. thinks that they were able to cut off a lot by taking out the pipeline, or allegedly taking out the pipeline. But there's another pipeline, and we're not having a problem here. We're getting it because we're using the southern pipeline from the Nord Stream. So the biggest problem is that the U.S. thinks that they like Vic said that they think that they know Russia. They don't. And since Russia occupied Hungary for a long time, there is a lot of people here who fully understand the Russian culture and how their mindset is. And I'm sorry, but it's nothing like the US mindset or actually any other country. They are really protective of their country.
Yes, they are. In this next clip here, Viktor Orban now gets into NATO and what NATO's doing, which really is kind of in theme and in line of the question of, well, two questions. Why is NATO still around? Number two, why are we funding NATO if their expiration date should have been decades ago?
So when I was very young, 86, if I remember well, there was an explosion of the nuclear power station in Ukraine by accident.
Yes.
And it infected us immediately. So if there is an escalation in Ukraine,
Chernobyl polluted.
Chernobyl, yeah, that could have an impact on us immediately. So it's Washington is far away, Russia and Ukraine is close. That's the Hungarian approach.
So, given the manpower imbalance between the Russian and Ukrainian armies and the attrition of the Ukrainian army, hundreds of thousands dead,
and many Hungarians as well. Nobody knows it, but we have a minority, a strong minority, more than 150,000 people in the territory of Ukraine, which was earlier part of Hungary. So it's a historical minority community living there. They are part of the Ukrainian state, and they are conscripted now to the army, and they die. They fight for Ukraine, and Hungarians, soldiers dying for Ukraine as Ukrainian citizens. So we lost, Hungarian nation, we are losing lives daily as also.
At a certain point, they're going to need more men. They're going to need more soldiers. Where are they going to come from?
That's the most risky question. So if any Western country would send any boots on the ground, that would mean a direct war between the West and Russia. And we are in a third world war immediately. So it's a very dangerous moment now.
That's obvious to you.
Absolutely. Not for me. Everybody on the street. All the ordinary citizens are aware that we are living in a very dangerous moment. So the third world war couldn't knocking on our door. So we have to be very, very careful. And that's my message always to America as well at NATO summit. Be careful with that.
And what kind of response do you get when you say that?
You know, they are bigger, therefore they are more clever. So that's always the case.
So they don't listen to you.
We can say in that way also, yeah.
I have to ask you about Nord Stream. So it seems very obvious that the Biden administration blew up Nord Stream, either directly or through proxies. I've never heard anyone dispute that, really. How is Western Europe, and Germany in particular, the biggest NATO member in Europe, not saying anything about this? It seemed, that just crushed the German economy. Why don't they say a word about it?
So when it has happened, we commented it as a terrorist attack.
Yes.
It was rejected in Germany and in the West. It was not a terrorist attack. It was something, you know. So that's a kind of evidence of lack of sovereignty. But it's the job of the Germans. I would not like to criticize them. What we Hungarians did immediately, we made clear that there is another pipeline, not just Nordic Stream, but there is a Southern Stream coming gas from Russia through the Southern Corridor. Turkey, Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary. And together with the Serbian Prime Minister, President, we did very clear that if anybody would like to do the same thing with the Southern Corridor as it was done with the Northern one, we consider it as a reason for war or terrorist attack, and we will immediately react. So don't do that. Probably you can do it with the Germans, but you can't do that with this region. That was very much clear.
Do you think people understand that?
I think so.
Well, yeah. So you're absolutely correct, Cagney. There's a lot of pride that goes into that whole region, and I don't think a lot of people are aware of the Southern Corridor pipeline. And Viktor Orban's pretty clear of they're not going to be like the Germans and allow an attack on that pipeline, or there's going to be immediate response. Do Americans understand just how close we are to a kinetic World War III going live?
No, I don't think that you guys do, because you're so far away. It's like it's a world away. That it's no different than when people talk about Taiwan, that they think that, well, you know, if something happens, if there's a war that breaks up in Taiwan, oh, so what? That's like oceans and oceans away. But I'm sorry, folks, it affects everybody, because if this war does break out, it's the whole continuation of a collapse of the economy. It is going to escalate so rapidly, and there's so many different countries in Europe that are sick and tired of this. It's going to come to your shores.
That's indeed true. As the world is now turning and as the world is now changing and the reset is just on its way into, well, into our own living rooms, that it's going to affect everyone's pocketbooks. There's going to be a major change, and BRICS is the leaders in that. But there's also going to be a major change in leadership. But what we did see is now the persecution of nation-state fellow leaders. We've seen it with President Khan over there in Pakistan. We've seen what happened with Bolsonaro in Brazil. And more recently, we've seen what happened to Donald Trump in his reemergence into the political landscape in the world stage. Well, what you're going to see here is Viktor Orban now talking about what the rest of the world, who many Americans are led to believe, they hate Donald Trump, what he's about, and his supporters. I don't know if that's quite the same for Viktor Orban. Here in this next clip, you're going to see what the true rest of the world thinks.
If you were in charge of NATO, if you were, say, Joe Biden, what would your next move be in the war in Ukraine? What would you do?
Peace immediately. Call back Trump. That's the only way out.
Call back Trump.
Call back Trump, because you can criticize him for many reasons. I understand all the discussion, but the best foreign policy of the recent several decades belonged to him. He did not initiate any new war.
Yes.
He treated nicely the North Koreans and Russia, even the Chinese. He delivered a policy which was the best one for Middle East, Abraham Accords.
Yes.
So that was a very good foreign policy. He's criticized that he's not educated enough to understand the world. But this is not the case. Facts count, and his foreign policy was the best one for the world in the last several decades I have seen. And if he would have been the president at the moment of the Russian invasion started, no, it would be not possible to do that by the Russians. So Trump is the man who can save the Western world and probably the human beings in the globe as well.
What's your take on that? And also, do you think Vladimir Putin shares the same sentiment?
I think it's not just Viktor Orban that feels this way. The normal run-of-the-mill person, maybe they're listening to the propaganda of the United States on the charges that they're trying to get Trump on, et cetera, et cetera. But the realistic view is the economy was the best ever. The foreign policies were the best ever. World leaders, I don't want to say feared Don. I think they respected him as a business person because he's not a politician. So therefore, his viewpoint on things was from more of a business perspective, which is what the rest of the world needs for everyone to be able to grow together. So it's very foolish to think that you guys there in the United States are allowing politicians who really only basically have their own interest at heart and what's going to make them their millions. They come into office with nothing, they leave with millions of dollars. That is the goal of the politicians of the United States. It is not the goal of the politicians in Europe and basically in the rest of the world. No one else thinks that way. It's only the U.S. that has this siloed thinking.
These are statements that I think need to be heard by the by the people of the West, and even the Western media, who tend to just live in these echo chambers that are not doing anyone any good. And you get stuck with the Justin Trudeaus of the world. But what do you want to say to maybe the American people who have made up their mind on who they trust, who they don't trust? Because it's not really about trust, but it's about what makes sense, as you heard Viktor Orban say there. But what is a message you want to get across to the people of the West?
Well, the biggest message, I think, is that, hey, we all belong to this NATO, and the U.S. has a huge input in NATO, and they had better rethink what they're suggesting gets done, because it is going to affect you, even though you're very, very far away. I mean, we have a 9 or 10 hour time difference between us, Dean, but despite what could happen on the shores here of Hungary, it will affect everybody in the United States as well. So when it comes time for the election, this is the time, folks. This can't continue, because it is going to be the demise. And if a World War III hits, it hits all of us, not just us over here in Europe.
Thank you very much, Cagney, and keep us up to date here at Late Night Update as we continue to forge ahead in the great unknown, if not just the reset itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean.
Welcome back, everybody, to a late night update as we're going to continue forging along here, where we're going to travel up north to our very, very near and dear friends of the North, Canada, where we're going to be talking to a business consultant of New World Precious Metals who, unlike any organization I have come across in quite some time, this is a little different. It's unique because they understand the financials of the world, yes, but what you're going to find out here soon is Mr. Bryce Wade, who's going to be joining us, is a very big observer of the geopolitical landscape and the evolving nature of it. So he's going to be joining us here tonight as we talk about Eastern Europe, the rise and the fall of the Ukraine narrative, and bring it all back here to North America, but also how can we preserve our wealth and save our future in the financial wars at hand. So let's welcome Mr. Bryce Wade.
Hey, Dean, how are you? Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Well, I'm as worried as anyone because, nobody's concerned more about the geopolitical landscape because I've been following this evolving world and this pandemic war for the past almost 4 years now. Bryce, I want to get your take on it because I think it's a very dire situation now as both of our countries in the military-industrial complex is really trying to sell and ramp up a war with Russia. What are you gauging on that from our neighbors to the north there in Canada?
So I think there's a couple aspects that warrant touching on, but I think Viktor Orban, what you mentioned in the opening sequence there, has a lot of value to it. So I'm not, as a Canadian citizen, Russia really hasn't done anything to me as a Canadian citizen, right? But my government, the Canadian government, has done quite a bit to me. The American government has done quite a bit to me in various different ways over my lifetime, and the Chinese government has also done a considerable amount of things to me as a Canadian citizen. And so, from that perspective, the war that we're being pushed into from various different places is not going to be good for anybody. And so, I think the big thing that we have to realize as people that care about one another and care about our livelihoods is that there's a difference, like Orban said, that there's a difference between the administrators and the people of all of these different countries.
No, that's so true, Bryce, because China's huge. There's billions and billions of Chinese. And, we're only familiar with what we see on television here in the West and just these Chinese people in Beijing, the social crediting score. And I can't imagine that out of all the billions of people, everybody and every single one of them are okay for what's happening in their country with all these systems in place to enslave and monitor their people. And it's creeping in little by little as fascism is painted liberalism on a global scale.
So the communism, if you want to think of it as not just the ideology, but the structure of organization of a country, which is essentially top-down dictatorship by a party of people. That's really what communism has basically become. That's creeping in everywhere. So in my own country here in Canada, that we have Chinese police stations that our government didn't do anything about until an outcry from the people, and they still haven't gotten rid of all of them. It's ridiculous. And on top of that, our Prime Minister, in his infinite stupidity, has also on record stating that he very much admires China's basic dictatorship in some way, shape, or form. And this is supposed to be a group of people that, for most of my life, the liberals on the left, we're supposed to be fighting for freedom, supposed to be fighting for free speech. We're against the censorship of people at universities because of religious reasons and stuff like that. And not only have they stopped doing that, but they've actively become the things that they supposedly are against. So to me, as generally a centrist, don't consider myself left or right. I basically don't really care where the idea comes from. I just care that it's good and that it has a good effect on the world around it, whatever the idea is. The left has really gone very much into what would generally be considered communism. It's just being rebranded as equity.
Right, and it's certainly being rebranded. I mean, people really did they expect communism or fascism to wear the old uniforms of the 1930s? I don't think so. But I want to come back to, we'll get back to talking about the horror of Havana, Justin Trudeau, in a bit. Or he might be a geisha girl. He loves the Chinese. I swear. I know I've seen him somewhere. But, I floated this idea not that long ago that of all the world leaders that are really just have that bravado impact and are the most effective, Vladimir Putin is the first that comes to mind. Everything he's done, everything he said, I'm trying to find a problem with that. because he speaks in his philosophy, even Viktor Orban for that fact. It's not much different than what we're talking about here tonight. So is it crazy to think that Vladimir Putin is the West, one of the West's last hope of survival in this pandemic war?
That's actually a really interesting perspective. So let me step back before actually answering that, because I do somewhat agree with it and disagree a little bit with it. Let me just step back for a second, because Canada is kind of in a unique position for a couple reasons. So one, we're actually situated between the two largest nuclear powers on the planet. So like if the U.S. and Russia go to war, all of their nukes, or at least half of them, are aimed at each other, and I'm sure that some of them will fall on somewhere in the north, because we are part of NORAD. So this is very much an existential threat to us. Like if World War III legitimately happens, the nukes are all coming my way, because obviously the U.S. would be one of the main target. Obviously everybody in the U.S. is a target as well. And so I've always looked at it personally. Now, I don't know how many people in my country share this position, but I've always looked at it as if there's an opportunity for peace, why are we not going for it? Why are we not taking that opportunity? Why is our country, why is your country not actively trying to create peace that we have all enjoyed for basically our lifetime? I mean, some people in the world have not been as lucky as us, and there is something to be said for that we are very lucky.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, Bryce, you had the so-called Biden administration, the pro-prosthetic mask administration, literally got a peace treaty that Putin and Ukraine was trying to, draft together. You had NATO and the so-called U.S. go over there and say, "Oh no, not on my dime." They ripped it up and just
the Minsk Accords.
Yeah, they don't want peace, because here, if they have peace, then people are waking up, they're finding there's no use for NATO anymore. There's no use for the United Nations, eventually the WHO, and eventually the EU. I think that Vladimir Putin I think he is an ally of the West and not the other. So that's why they don't want peace. They won't benefit from it, but continue because.
Yeah, it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that, and let me explain why. So, in the West, we have Western oligarchs. So the West is basically controlled by the oligarchy. I kind of just use that as a blanket term with all the people, the bankers and the oligarchs and the CFR and all the other idiots that are making all the decisions for us. So you can basically blanket term them the oligarchy, the people that are making the decisions for us. We didn't vote for it. We didn't vote for this stuff. They just get to decide essentially what happens in our countries. So it's the same for Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the U.S., Britain. All of these, the Five Eyes countries basically that are the majority what makes up NATO. Obviously, other than the EU, they've all been essentially on the same side and on the same alignment with what's been going and what they're trying to do, rather. So that means central bank digital currencies, digital IDs, microchipping, all sorts of different stuff. So that's the West, right? The East is basically the same, but from a different perspective. So in the West, they've used corporate power to achieve this goal of control, right? In the East, they use government control. So it's more dictatorships, it's more authoritarianism, communism, obviously. And, Putin, to get back to your question, is essentially a dictator and has been for about 20 years. Like, he's outlived, what are we talking, almost 5 presidencies now. So to get back to your actual question about whether or not he's a savior, in all rights and respects, Russia should be an ally. It's a Christian nation. It has Western values. It is basically supplying the EU with all sorts of different resources that it needs. It's I think it was 15 or 20% of the world's grain production. It's a very important country and has a lot of resources that we need for industrialization and all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm not totally sold on the idea that he's a savior per se, but he could be. Right, so there is the potential, because say what you want about Putin, and there's lots of bad things that you could say. He is a dictator. He's done some pretty horrific stuff. He got into power through essentially terrorism of his own people, false flag. I mean, that stuff is all facts, right? But ultimately, he's not a stupid person. Like, he very much believes, I think, that Russia needs to be defended against somebody that's attacking it, and he's taken whatever steps he felt necessary to protect the interests of the Russian people. And there's been a lot of talk lately about what would happen if we got rid of Putin, we being the West, right? And there's definitely a lot of other people in Russia that are much more hawkish, that are like, screw it, nuke the West, this is it, we've had enough. There are definitely people that are calling for the use of nuclear weapons. Canada basically has no army to speak of, because we're attached at the hip to the U.S. We don't have to worry about it. I've never thought of war until very recently, because I've never had to. But that aside, I personally, as a citizen of Canada, have never had to worry about China kicking down our door or another country messing around, because the U.S. is the most powerful country on the planet and has the most powerful military in all of human history, right? And so if that new order, monopolar order, is going to be changed, which China is trying to do, which is an actual risk, a legitimate risk, and from that perspective, Putin and Russia should have been an ally against China. But what they're really trying to do is destroy Russia so that China can't have them as an ally.
We have China with the biggest navy ever. You see a rush of joint U.S. Australian military drills over there down in the land down under as they prepare now to defend Taiwan. We have a multitude of submarines on the coast of the U.S. and where you are. Some of them are they're able to identify adversary or ally, and then others are unknown. Are we looking at a nuclear standoff at this point? Or are we looking at a joint effort by nation-state allies around the world that are going to really do a global insurrection?
When you think about problems, any problem in a society, right, there's a couple big questions that come from that. Okay, so what are the problems? Number one, how are we going to solve them? Number two, what are we going to do to ensure that those problems are solved, and what ultimate results from these actions that we're supposedly going to be taking do we want to get to? And then after that, how do you measure success of whatever that is? So in the grand scheme of things, and when I say that, I mean like as our species, as our human civilization, right? This is a very, very important time because there's a lot of things that are coming to they're coming to a head all at the same time. So it's not just World War III. It's not just nation states. It's not just multinational corporations. It's not just the economy. It's not just our environment. It's all of these things happening at the same time. And one of the bedrocks of Western civilization has been our ability to solve problems and create systems that do that, right? So we had forest fires. We created a system where we could go out and fight those forest fires. Obviously, they're not working now, and obviously the stupid-ass carbon tax didn't work.
Right.
But the point that I'm making is that these systems were created for a purpose.
Yeah, we created these institutions out there, so like the Department of Health, the Department of Education, and so forth. And a lot of people, like you're saying, what we call status, have based their entire life, their system, their identity on these institutions. You're absolutely on the money. Keep going.
Yeah, and so these institutions are being they're not breaking down, they're being broken down for a specific purpose. And so to go back to the point, I think that World War III has an additional purpose for getting rid of the soldiers of all of our nation states, destabilizing and destroying various things that they don't want. So let's say Florida as an example. They're like, oh, these Florida people, we don't like them too much. Nuke them, and that's something that can be done in a war because all bets are off at that point. When you have people that are organized as a community, have strong communities, know what's true and what's not, can identify the bullshit being told to them, and are not being fooled by lies, it's much more difficult for them to just do whatever they want, and people just submit and not care because they're like,
yo, why are you lying to me? I don't appreciate that. Kick your ass out of there.
Right? But that for hundreds of years, literally, if not thousands, an oligarchy has been in control of every major power on earth.
But what you described very eloquently was literally the definition of psychological warfare, which is the most deadliest warfare, because you don't know from which way, in which direction it's coming, when it starts and when it ends. And this is a World War III without one bullet being fired, which is even more deadlier, because you got to run out of ammo eventually. And the enemy was clear and present. But it's hard. It goes back down to the family. How many families out there have had to come to the realization that, we have a problem in this family. Our dad is an abusive alcoholic. What are we going to do about it? Mm-hmm. And it goes back to what you said earlier. What are we going to do about it? Because they're like, we allow people to put their hands down our pants at the airports. We allow people to just invade our privacy in our mobile devices and every smart device. Everything around us is smart except for the individual or the human being now. So this is a psychological warfare. So now let's talk about this too, as we're coming back home to the North American roots here. We heard Viktor Orban. Putin has said the same. I'm sure Xi Jinping has even dreamed about it, and many others. Where does the Donald Trump factor come in play from a Canadian perspective?
So I heard a quote from one of my favorite YouTube channels, Canadian Prepper. He posted a really great quote the other day that I think has a lot to do with what you just mentioned here, which is that we have Paleolithic brains with medieval institutions with godlike technology. And what he's really saying with that, and what that quote really means, is that the structures that we're organized by, and the reasoning and the systems that we've created are not as advanced as our technology, right? Socrates even had this awesome quote that I've always remembered for this reason: is that technology advances, but humanity does not. And we've basically come to a point now where our technology has gone so far beyond our ability to organize with it, because our structures are so old. Like, I'll just use Canada as an example before getting back to your question. Our country, and yours is even older than this, was created 150 years ago, right? Britain was 600 years ago. Hungary 1,000 years. We have advanced our technology so much in just the last 50, even the last 20, right? We have the power in our hand to have instant communication with almost anyone on the planet at will. How come our politics and our political system has not advanced at all? It's ridiculous, right? And so back to your question about Trump, that is, even the fact that Donald Trump is potentially the savior of the human race, potentially. But the fact that it's not he's not an elected leader. Like, the idea of politics, because this is what it boils down to. Okay, politics is the game of a group of people representing their interests of their group of people, whoever that group of people is, and the game is getting other people to agree that what you're saying is good for them as well, right? And so what we've basically shown through our incompetently and ridiculously corrupt systems is that we do not get the best people to do these things, right? And I was listening to a podcast the other day about corruption. So I don't know if you ever heard this guy, Jordan Harbinger, does a podcast, Jordan Harbinger Show. And the reason I bring it up is because he did a really good segment on the reasons for corruption, right? If you have a system where the reward for being a part of that system is power, you're going to attract people that want power.
It's the institutions, the sociopathic institutions is attracting the power hungry, where we have a culture now that says it's good to fight and lie, cheat and steal, which is based a reflection of every reality. We see what has happened to music. You don't have to buy the albums anymore. You could buy singles and have them on your device instantly. Same with movies. You don't have to go to the theater anymore, VCRs. You can have it digitalized right there in your living room. So it's only natural that you ask, well, shouldn't the same be happening to politics in the way we have representatives, that are supposed to be paid off our taxation? How come there's no change? They're still in the Roman model.
And with that in particular, this is the best example of why they didn't like Bud Light. They don't like what's happening to Target. People are slowly realizing that I do have power. And the one thing that these people, being the oligarchy and the people that are doing all this dumb shit to us, the one thing that they fear more than anything else, by far, there's not even a close second, is that we realize that if we organize, we don't need their dumb shit ideas and all the stupid systems that they've created that benefit them and not us. Because there's a great quote by Henry Ford back in the day. I can't even remember when this was done, but basically amounted to, if the American people knew how corrupt their financial system was, there'd be a riot in the street the next day.
Yes, yeah.
Right, and it holds true till now. And one of the big things, and this is my answer to your question, is the big thing that Trump did was, for better or for worse, he woke a lot of people up. And to be honest, I wasn't really a big Trump fan, really ever. I am much more now, because I go on hard data. I don't give a say. I care about what they do, because that's really the only way that you can judge and determine whether or not somebody is representative of what their ideas are.
Their actions, right?
Yeah, their actions, right? And the ideas that people hold, there's the things that people say, there's the actions people take, and there's the results that they get, right? So with that structure, Trump is by far the best president that the U.S. has ever had. He vastly increased the economy. He didn't start any new wars. His foreign policy was, and I very much agree with his foreign policy more than anything else. But the point being is that internationally and strategically, he did a fantastic job.
Now let's talk Turkey here. Let's talk Canadian Turkey, as
Sure.
some might say. Looking at Canada, and I have to be very honest with you, is up until this entire war, I can honestly tell you that Americans pretty much knew nothing about Canada compared to how much Canada knows about the U.S., even how our politics works. and it is very alluring. I give it, it's a very alluring sport, if you will. But now learning about Canada more and more, euthanasia is legal in Canada. You have Chinese. Well, they go beyond bistros now. They have Chinese police headquarters.
Mhm.
You have the CCP and the UN, who are just putting their feet on the maple leaf mantle and wiping their feet on the Magna Carta there. And then you have a whore from Havana who has less than 9% approval rating going into his last election, that somehow, some way is managing to stay alive and take orders directly from the WEF. Well, he's masquerading around with the beard, his former wife now. Now we know what it truly is all about. Who is literally blocking, censoring information coming out of your country, of Canada, into everywhere else, and vice versa. And from my point of view, and I want to get your take on it, it appears that Canada they're bracing Canada to do a big kill-off of a very highly miracle jabbed of a country. Do you see it that way?
Again, a lot to unpack there, but yeah, very, very much so in various different ways. So let's start with the WF specifically. So one of the problems that we have in Canada is not only is our government very communist and very authoritarian, but one of the reasons for this, as Klaus Schwab himself actually said on camera, is that they've penetrated the cabinet of our government, and we are essentially operating as a vassal state of the WEF. Right now, just if I may take a second for the WEF, I want everybody to really understand what the WEF is. Okay, WEF is essentially the PR and the retail facing side of the oligarchy. Okay, this is where they publicly get a bunch of leaders to come and be a part of their cool kid crew. Our deputy prime minister, who is also the finance minister of Canada, her name is Chrystia Freeland. Absolutely despise her. I can't say enough bad things about her for obvious
She's
reasons.
a descendant of Goebbels, I believe.
I can't remember if it's Goebbels, but definitely her grandfather was in the Nazi military for sure. And so she is essentially acting she's acting for the World Economic Forum, not for Canadians. And there's a T word that I'm happy to call her for that. But Justin Trudeau isn't actually running the show. He's the poster boy, and he's basically taking orders from above and somebody else through Chrystia Freeland, in my opinion.
Easily. I mean, he's the most limp-wristed little sissy who just hated Trump and really hates America, and he hates Canada. And you have Chrystia Freeland, as you said, and then the conservatives over there in Canada discovered that there was CCP money funneling and managing of big prominent politicians in Canada, yet they won't turn over who that was and if they're still there. And I happen to believe one of those is Justin Trudeau.
It actually gets worse than that. Because what they actually found multiple times is that the Justin Trudeau Foundation, of which Justin Trudeau was connected to, received money directly from a CCP official to the tune of about either, I can't remember if it's 200 grand or a 1 mil, one of the two. And they gave that money back. It was like, oh yeah, it was a mistake. As if that matters, that they took it in the first place. So they're literally on tape advocating for these policies. They've instituted them in Canada. They've taken money directly from the CCP, and they're instituting policies in line with that. So to your point about censorship, so because of this stupid C11 and C18 that passed earlier this year, I, as a Canadian citizen, no longer have the ability to view news sites, news articles on social media. That means Instagram, LinkedIn, all sorts of different places. They are not allowed. They basically remove. We're essentially one step away from being under China's Great Wall of censorship. It's insane. And the thing that pisses me off about my country and Canadians in general is we're very polite. It takes a lot for us to get pissed and do anything about anything, unless it has to do with hockey. We burn places that you see this place behind me? There was a riot like right down the street from where is it? Just over there, 10 years ago, or whenever it was.
You mean like right now? Like, are you coming back from the riot?
No. No, this happened over hockey. It was over a hockey game.
Yeah.
And we're like, this burn the place. It was ridiculous, right? But the point that I'm making is that it takes a lot for us to get there, and this is a problem with Western people in general. Like, we are generally try to be, I care about you, let's work it out, peaceful, blah, blah, blah. Apologists as well, and they've gotten us to a point where we hate the institutions that created the greatest amount of freedom ever in history, ever. Like for the vast vast majority of human history, if you weren't a king or a very wealthy person, you were a peasant, and you were on subsistence living, and your entire existence was toiling in a field and hoping that you don't get raided and destroyed by somebody from the next town over, or another invading army, or just get slaughtered by raiders or something. Like that was the experience for the vast majority of people for the vast majority of history.
Right.
And we are so lucky in the Western world that we have no concept of hardship like that anymore, right? And the risk that we're at right now, and this goes back to your point about the World War III and all this stuff, like we are very much at a crossroads right now that if we don't fight back and we don't secure our rights, our communities, our resources, our skills, our assets, the things that are locally valuable to us, we will lose them. Like the goal here isn't for the West to be destroyed. Like that is a goal, but the ultimate goal is for the enslavement or the destruction of anybody not on their little team. And if you think about it like that, this war isn't East versus West. It's the oligarchy versus humanity. And so for me personally, I have this thing that I believe that's called a minimum human standard. I don't really care what color your skin is. I don't care what religion you're from. I don't care about anything other than what you do and the results of what you do, right? And in that system, in that belief structure, I want a system and I want a world that works for all of us. I shouldn't need to go and kill other people to secure my future and to secure my family. That's a shit system. We need to upgrade it. And that's kind of
you're describing this is the old world order that is now transitioning into transhumanist in what they have described as a post-human era. And really they want to do this without any hurdles in the way, any forks in the road. And that type of DNA that is going to stop that, well, it is based in the Western Caucasian DNA, which a lot of this, whether Canada or U.S., are descendants from a totalitarian Europe that have came to America, like the Irish and Hispanics all over the world, to create something and have wealth and gain wealth, as this is the only country, in Canada as well, I assume, that it really gives the individual a chance. In the war that we're fighting is on the individual, which is the greatest minority in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what they don't want. They want to collectivize. They want a centralized government. And that's what I see happening. But see, a lot of people are afraid. Like, for instance, right now, oh, you just what? I thought you went swimming.
Sorry.
Oh, is that
no, sorry, my cat's going nuts.
Oh, they rule us, don't they? Cats are. Well, if the question is posed, what does the world need now? Leaders like Viktor Orban said, Trump. That's not an indication of a significant leader of the past 30 years that has really made a change since Ronald Reagan. Well, that's very significant in itself. This is World War III on many levels and on many different soils. The only difference this time is Fourth Reich is scattered and littered throughout the world with the help of the CCP and, NATO. So on that note, I want to thank you for joining us here at Late Night Update. We'll continue to carry the torch and shine a light on the rest of the world as the geopolitical landscape continues to mold and shape into something we've never seen before. For all of us here at Late Night Update, I'm Dean Ryan. Thank you for sharing a bit of your night with all of us. In the meantime, always remember to stay tuned and stay awake. Good night, everybody. uh, Tucker, Vladimir Tucker, that's not his name, Tucker Carlson.
And for the whole of the 19th century, it was the indispensable drawing aid for great.
The dark inner nights. Welcome back, everybody, to Late Night Update as we continue to forge along in the misty nights of North America and come back home to the domestics. Let's welcome him to the stage. All right, I told that intro.